Jason, it's a genuine pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for that. You, Mark, as well, for introducing me and for setting this up. So it looks like Jason, Carlos, and I are the only three people that I can actually see on video at the moment, which is great. I'm going to invite all of you to turn your videos on because I want to be able to see you. Like, this work is really powerful work, and I want to be able to see each of you. Now, I do understand that some of you may not have a good enough internet connection, and that is the only excuse that I'm going with for not turning your video on. If you're having a bad hair day, it can't be worse than my hair day, so that's not an excuse. So please turn your video on if you can turn your video on so I can see your beautiful faces. And if at any point I lose the connection, Karen, I'm going to be handing over to you because your creativity is at 11. So I think you can quite successfully lead the group. So it is wonderful to be here. Like, for those of you who have turned your video, I have another question for you. And this question is, have you managed to complete the preparatory work that we sent through a couple of days ago from World Class Academy? So you should have received an email from World Class Academy. It actually came from me, and from Mark, and from Jason, inviting you to go through the Purpose app. If you've done it, please raise your hand now. If you've completed the preparatory work, you've gone through the app, please raise your hand so that I can see whether you have done it. And this is not a test, by the way. It's not a test whether you've done it or you haven't done it. It's genuinely, I want to know, because it's going to shape how we run the session today. Okay, so I can see one or two of you have done it and one or two of you haven't done it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give a little introduction to what was in those videos for those of you who weren't able to see it. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to do a demonstration, and I'm going to take one person through a demonstration of articulating their personal purpose. And then in the breakouts that Jason and Mark mentioned, what I'm going to do is give you the opportunity to work out your personal purpose statement. So you may be asking yourself the question, why work out my personal purpose? I know what I do. I'm perfectly happy with what I do. I'm very good at what I do. I run my organization and I'm pretty happy in terms of that. So I know what I do. Well, purpose isn't what you do. Purpose has been socialized to become and define what we do. But the way Jason and I define it, it is who you are and why you exist. And if that sounds a little bit existential, it's supposed to be a little bit existential. And I will explain why in the next 10 minutes or so. And so what I want to do is give you a little bit of the background behind why this is so important. And then I'm going to invite one of you to jump forward, and I'm going to take you literally through the journey of articulating your personal purpose. So if we look into the world outside us, what we see around us at the moment is a number of what I would refer to as symptoms of imbalance. And we don't have to look very far. Look, I'm currently in Croatia, believe it or not. You might be able to tell from my accent, I'm not Croatian, I'm actually British. But I escaped from the UK 17 years ago. I now live in Switzerland. And we've just come down here with my children for a week on holiday. I'm working, as you can see. I'm just the driver for the week. And we're in a hotel here, and all of the personnel in the hotel are wearing masks. And I'm sure that that is a similar occurrence for many of you. All of us are in different stages of lockdown. So here we are in this hotel. All the staff are wearing masks. We see that symptom, you know, the big symptom behind that, which is COVID-19. What else is happening in the world? Well, in June, we saw all of the racism protests around the world, and the protests following the death of a man in Minneapolis. And it wasn't just one man, it's many men who have died over the last decades. And not just in America, all over the world. Look, I'm British. You know, the former empire, the British Empire, was responsible for millions of deaths. And that is something that I have to come to terms with. So second symptom is we're seeing the race protests around the world. Third symptom, here I am, and it's 32 degrees here. It's also 32 degrees in Switzerland. It should not be 32 degrees. For those of you working in Fahrenheit, that's 80s. Jason, I'm looking at you. Nod if that's roughly right. I don't know. It's high. It's warm, right? It should not be that hot in Switzerland. It should not be that hot in northern Croatia at this time of year. So we also have climate change. We could go through all of these different symptoms, the symptoms at the level of society, the symptoms at the level of business, the symptoms at the level of the individual. In fact, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to share a little bit about my perspective on what is going on in the world right now. At the moment, so give me a thumbs up if you still loading. Okay, still loading. All right, cool. Can you see my screen now? Okay, cool. All right, awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through the inner-outer game. And the inner-outer game is a model which really describes how we experience reality. So in the world outside us, we can see some of the symptoms I've just referred to: COVID-19, climate change, the race protests. We can also see similar symptoms at the level of organizations. We know that right now we have some of the highest levels of unemployment in the world, and that's going to increase. We know that outside organizations, only 15% of people actually trust organizations, whether they be NGOs, governments, companies, or the media, to fix the problems that we see. And inside organizations, only 15% of people are actually engaged within the organization. So outside we have a trust crisis, inside we have a trust crisis. What's happening at the level of the individual? We have the highest levels of divorce globally around the world, can't spell today. We have the highest levels of depression around the world. We have the highest levels of sleep deprivation. We have the highest levels of poor diet that we've ever seen in the world. I could go on and on and on, but you get the point. If we look at the symptoms in the world outside, it looks like a pretty bad situation at the moment. The world is out of balance. And so how do you tackle the problems in the world outside? Well, the normal way that we tackle problems in the world outside is by dealing with them with what I refer to as the outer game. Now, you may be wondering, what is the outer game? The outer game is our identity. And all of us have an identity. It grows, it starts to really kind of emerge around the age of 2. For those of you who have children, you'll have noticed that your child's identity starts to grow around that age. And if you don't have children, you were a child once, and you probably don't have any memories before the age of 2. And that's because literally your conscious mind has not started to kick in. So the outer game is the identity or your personality. And the way to tap into it is, or the doorway into the outer game is the first 5 senses. And the key to unlock that is what I call your artist profile. I'm actually an artist, as Jason mentioned, but you could also use other personality profiles like Myers-Briggs or DISC, or there are multiple different personality profiles. Now, personality profiles basically say that your personality is fixed. Well, except for the artist profile, I say that your personality is not fixed. In fact, you're not the same as you were when you were 2. You're not the same as you were when you were a teenager. You're not the same as you were even yesterday. As Herodotus, the Greek philosopher, said, no man steps in the same river twice. Why? Because the man is different and so is the river. So we are constantly changing. Now, if we try and use our identity, our outer game, to address the problems in the world today, what ends up happening is we fuel them. We actually make them worse. We don't reduce them. We actually exacerbate them. Even if our intentions are good, we end up exacerbating them. We end up creating unintended waves. And I've observed this from the work I've done as an artist painting in extreme locations. And you may have observed that yourself, that when your ego or your identity gets involved, you don't actually solve the problem, you create more resistance, and more resistance creates more waves. So how do we resolve the problems that we see in the world outside us? And there are, of course, many, many more issues which each of you are facing. I haven't looked into all of them, and we don't have time to do that today, but you get the general idea of where I'm going. So what then is the inner game? And what happens when we tap into the inner game? Well, I'm not actually going to give the inner game a name, because as soon as I do that, I trigger your belief systems around what the inner game is. So I'm going to allow you to come up with your own word to describe the inner game. What I'm going to do instead is describe how you access the inner game and the power of what happens when you do actually access the inner game. So the doorway into the inner world is your sixth sense or your intuition. And the key to unlock it is purpose, your personal purpose. Now, we have known this, Wisdom cultures have known this for thousands of years, literally thousands and thousands of years. They've known that when you unlock your inner game, what you unlock is creativity, collaboration, compassion. In fact, all the things that you need today to tackle the problems that we see in the world outside us. And we've known this for thousands and thousands of years. You know, you go all the way back to the I Ching, you go back to Ayurveda, you go back to Tantra, you go back to shamanism, you go back to some of the original kind of knowledge in the countries in which you live, and we've known this. In fact, you know, if you go back pre the agricultural revolution about 9,000 to 12,000 years ago, when we were part of the ecosystem, our intuition was important to help us avoid being killed and to kill. In other words, to avoid being hunted and to hunt. We needed that intuition because we were part of the system. As soon as we separate ourselves from the system, as soon as the agricultural revolution starts to happen, we put ourselves above nature. And as soon as we put ourselves above nature, we separate ourselves from nature. We are no longer part of it, and we start this separation. So what exists in between, and why is it that we don't literally unlock our inner game, all of us, use our outer game to align with our inner game and address the issues that we face in the world outside us? Why do we not do that? Well, there's something that sits in the middle of these two, and it's become known recently as mindset. And at the company level, it's known as culture, and at the level of society, it's known as myths. So we have a mindset, and our mindset is either aligned with our inner game and enables us to use our outer game in order to address it, or it's not. Either it enables us to do that, or it's not. Either it helps us, or it blocks us. And so the work that Jason and I do is to help people literally to change their mind, all right? Because when you change your mind, you unlock all of this massive potential in here. And this potential connects into what Albert Einstein called the unified field, and Carl Jung, the father of modern psychology, called the collective unconscious. And that world sits over here. So if you tap into this world, what you're basically tapping into is the unified field or the collective unconscious. And you may have other terms that you use to refer to these, but this is what the world of science uses to refer to these worlds. What stops us from doing that is our genes. And it's not just our mindset. Our mindset then actually expresses our genes. So our genes, according to epigenetics, are a lot more like a menu in a restaurant. In a restaurant, you never go into a restaurant and order everything on the menu. At least I never do, unless it's a really, really small menu. And then you go, yeah, I'll have everything. Actually, you only ever express about 5% of your genes at any one time. So what often happens is our experiences that we have when we're young end up creating a vicious cycle, which becomes a self-reinforcing, a self-reinforcing cycle. I just showed you a couple of visuals there, which I wasn't going to show you today. So what we end up with is a vicious cycle in this world here, which is reinforced by our genes or our gene expression. In other words, our DNA begins to reflect what we believe we can do and what we believe we can't do. Now, the first step in changing this, so Our genes are not actually fixed. Even though we were taught that in school, epigenetics says our genes are not fixed. What that means is you can actually change your mindset. And if you change your mindset, you change the neural network in your brain, and you end up changing your gene expression. When you change your gene expression, you then can do something that you may not have thought you can do. So in my world, that enables us, the people I work with, to help them create a masterpiece. In your world, it would enable you to create the change that you want to see in the world. So that is a really, really quick summary of the inner outer game model. I could go deeper into it. It's like layers and layers and layers. And the 2 slides that I accidentally just showed you there are deeper levels of it. But we're not going to do that right now. What we're focusing on right now is this, because this is the first key to unlock that world. And if you think of this on a balance, which is what we've drawn here, which I think was Jason's suggestion, at the moment we are overbalanced in this world over here, collectively and individually. And therefore the purpose of doing purpose is to rebalance us so that we unlock this potential, which is an unlimited potential in the world, to ultimately change this world, to change the world outside us. So let me stop there. As I say, I could go on and on and on and give you the science behind it, the quantum physics, the Einsteinian theory, why it's different from the Newtonian theory. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop. I'm going to see, does anyone have any questions at this stage about anything I've said there? I realize that, by the way, I've collapsed epigenetics, neurology, quantum physics, mysticism into one 10-minute introduction. So if there are any questions, I totally understand. Silence. I'm going to take